Okay, let me get into this earthquake news here, because there's a lot of disinformation going on. Fracking, when it's done in areas that are built up, or when it's done improperly, is a problem. It is toxic chemicals that they use in extracting natural gas and oil and shoring up the different stratas. It is needed to get the oil and gas. It can be done properly. But what's happening is now it's being blamed for earthquakes that are happening in the Midwest and other areas. And there are major studies that show that giant oil fields over time can suck out enough oil or gas to then, in one big event, have some settling or a small earthquake. That's been confirmed. But they're now saying that earthquakes in the Midwest and other areas are being caused by fracking, period. That's an article out of Bloomberg. And that's just not the case. I mean, the Mississippi River has had its course changed repeatedly in the last 200 years after giant Midwestern earthquakes. So the Earth goes through cycles tectonically, and to say that humans and their fracking is what's doing it is ridiculous. Now, as for the big booms, we've got an article going up with some research that was done by the Intel Hub from the LA Times decades ago about giant underground train projects and these nuclear-powered locomotives. And that's what I've said. A lot of times this booming is associated with when they're hitting certain hard rock stratas underground and the hums that are heard when they're building these giant underground facilities. So that report just went up on InfoWars.com if you want to see that. Here's another one. And this is out of the End of the American Dream blog, and they did some great research here, and they link through to all the different factoids and government announcements here and tectonic research from seismologists. The Ring of Fire is roaring to life, and there will be earthquakes of historic importance on the west coast of the United States. Does it seem to you like there's been an unusual amount of seismic activity around the world lately? Well, it isn't just your imagination. The Ring of Fire is roaring to life. And there is really bad news for the west coast of the United States. Approximately 90% of all earthquakes and approximately 75% of all volcanic eruptions occur along the Ring of Fire. We can show people on screen the Ring of Fire. You can just look it up if you want to. It goes all the way around the Pacific, around Australia, around Southeast Asia, China, Japan, over the Pacific to the north, down along Alaska, down the west coast of Canada, the west coast of the U.S., right down Central and South America, down to Chile. That's why the Andes have so many earthquakes there. You can see that barrier reef of islands that come off Alaska. Those are there from tectonic activity with the seafloor being driven up. The Ring of Fire is roaring to life, and that is really bad news for the west coast of the United States. Considering the fact that the entire west coast of the United States lies along the Ring of Fire, we should be concerned that the Ring of Fire is becoming more active. On Wednesday, the most powerful strike-slip earthquake ever recorded happened along the Ring of Fire. If that earthquake had happened in a major U.S. city along the west coast, the city would have been entirely destroyed. They have a link to the documents proving that. That's true. It would just be total devastation. Scientists tell us that there is nearly a 100% chance and a certainty that the big one will hit California at some point. In recent years, we've seen Japan, Chile, Indonesia, and New Zealand all get hit by historic earthquakes. It is inevitable that there will be earthquakes of historic importance on the west coast of the United States as well. So far, we have been very fortunate, but the good fortune will not last indefinitely. In a previous article, they showed that earthquakes are becoming more frequent around the globe. They have links to that data. In 2001, there were 137 earthquakes of magnitude 6.0 or greater, and in 2011, there were 205. The charts and data that are presented in the previous article show a clear upward trend in large global earthquakes that just so happen to be hitting population centers most of the time over the past decade. And that is why what happened this week is so alarming. On Wednesday, a magnitude 8.6 earthquake struck off the coast of Indonesia, and that was rapidly followed by a magnitude 8.2 earthquake off the coast of Indonesia. Fortunately, those gigantic earthquakes did not produce a devastating tsunami. But that doesn't mean that those earthquakes were not immensely powerful. There are over 440 nuclear reactors of industrial use. There's hundreds of experimental ones, 2 of them in Austin. People say those don't exist because it's too scary. Okay, it doesn't exist. In North Austin, at the J.J. Pickle Research Center. That's built directly on the Balcones fault line. And right down the street is a extinct volcano. But, I mean, I've looked at maps. It's like they go, oh, if it's the worst fault zone, the worst spot in Japan is Fukushima on the maps. And it gets hit by tsunamis. And how many nuclear reactors on the West Coast, guys? Look that factoid up. I think it's more than 30. Imagine if there's big earthquakes for those reactors. Well, they'll just blow up and rain down radiation on us, and our media will be like, go outside and breathe heavily. Radiation is now good for you. Your government loves you. And HBO is promoting pedophilia, but they say it's good. You know, I mean, it's just craziness. It's total craziness. We'll be right back. Stay with us. More news straight ahead. All right, here's some of the headlines up at InfoWars.com right now. Big green oil money. WWF, founded and run by Royal Dutch Shell. And Patrick Henningsen's article that we'll show folks goes through the evidence that the big oil companies are supporting the carbon tax. They're the ones pushing it. They're owned by the big mega banks. And again, if you look at the featured news area of InfoWars.com, we have our video report up there. InfoWars reporters harassed by cops for asking questions about Chicken Man and told that they couldn't enter the city council building. We've got a new development on that with them joining us here in just a moment. And then right here, we've got a big story, Bilderberg to pick Romney's puppet mate. And that is a big, big deal. There's more news on this today. But this isn't just about Bilderberg set to pick his running mate. It's the fact that the Washington Post, from the founding of Bilderberg back in 1954 in Oosterbeek, Holland, with the Dutch royalty and all the rest of them, meeting there with the British royalty and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, the Washington Post has always had Jane Graham, the founder of it, owner of it, or then her son there. They never would talk about it. They were sworn to secrecy, the only media at first allowed in there. And now the Washington Post came out yesterday in an article, In the Loop, shout at a dictator, get some VP cred. And they officially linked to the Bilderberg website that a few years ago was just nothing. Now they're going public. And that's what this is a coming out. And they say, yeah, he ought to pick this certain person. That's probably what Bilderberg would like. You know, a lot of people think Bilderberg is going to basically choose. Bilderberg's been involved helping choose running mates before, they say. So now, before it didn't exist. Then when it did exist, it didn't have power. And now, oh yeah, it chooses. It's like in Europe, where in multiple countries, like Greece and Italy, Goldman Sachs publicly appoints the presidents and prime ministers now. And publicly says they've captured them. But because it's not a foreign government, or you know, well, at least it's not a Ruski or a Chi-Com, it's all right to have bankers conquer us. I mean, we've got to get our mind around that we've been conquered here. And in the article, they just mentioned, oh, yeah, Bilderberg, you know, did put pressure on there to put John Edwards in as the running mate in 2004 of Senator Kerry, and Bilderberg does make a lot of decisions. And, well, the question is, you know, Bilderberg kind of wants this person. It's like a public communique directly to Mitt Romney. A story in today's Washington Post written by veteran columnist Al Kamen suggests that the Bilderberg Group may have a decisive role to play in picking Mitt Romney's running mate, continuing a recent trend in which the secretive cabal has had a direct influence on U.S. presidential approach. But that's only part of it. Why are they now admitting they have an influence? Through their house organ, the Washington Post. This is a big deal. Kamen has been writing for the Washington Post for over 3 decades and also worked with Watergate icons Woodward and Bernstein, suggesting the title of his column, In the Loop, has some meaning behind it. Well, yeah, he's saying I'm part of the establishment. I've been told this. And it's a message to folks that are in the loop. Cameron remarks on how both President Obama and Hillary Clinton are heading to the Summit of the Americas this weekend in Colombia to meet with over 30 other heads of state. They will be joined by Senator Mark Rubio of Florida, who has been touted as a potential VP, having endorsed Mitt Romney last month. Curiously, not many senators seem to be going. In fact, it may be that the only one going for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is Mark Rubio, a possible vice presidential pick. By the way, Jim Tucker said, well, it was actually Mark Anderson with him, that they were looking at it could be at this meeting, because they'll have Bilderberg steering meetings that aren't the official meeting, but they'll get together and have piggyback meetings at these other global meetings. So he goes on to say, a possible vice presidential pick who we're told is flying commercial to attend, writes Cameron, adding that Rubio's presence could help boost his foreign policy chops, just as a visit with the clandestine Bilderberg group was key in John Edwards being picked as John Kerry's #2 in 2004. I thought it didn't exist. I thought I was a crazy man. I thought the New York Times just 4 years ago had an article saying I was having hallucinations in Virginia and imagining people following me. Yeah, helicopters, motorcades, machine guns, Marines in plain clothes, people trying to set us up, police arresting people, world leaders on site, no media coverage except that I'm insane. No, I'm not insane. You thought the people were insanely stupid and that you could con them, and now you've been caught with your pants down, Washington Post. Confirmed. But they're now saying that earthquakes in the Midwest and other areas are being caused by fracking, period. That's an article out of Bloomberg. And that's just not the case. I mean, the Mississippi River has had its course changed repeatedly in the last 200 years after giant Midwestern earthquakes. So the Earth goes through cycles tectonically, and to say that humans and their fracking is what's doing it is ridiculous. It can be done properly, but what's happening is now it's being blamed for earthquakes that are happening in the Midwest and other areas. And there are major studies that show that giant oil fields over time can suck out enough oil or gas to then, in one big event, have some settling or a small earthquake. That's been confirmed. Okay, let me get into this earthquake news here, because there's a lot of disinformation going on. Fracking, when it's done in areas that are built up, or when it's done improperly, is a problem. It is toxic chemicals that they use in extracting natural gas and oil and shoring up the different stratas. It is needed to get the oil and gas. Now, as for the big booms, we've got an article going up with some research that was done by the Intel Hub from the LA Times decades ago about giant underground train projects and these nuclear-powered locomotives. And that's what I've said. A lot of times this booming is associated with when they're hitting certain hard rock stratas underground and the hums that are heard when they're building these giant